Have you ever had the feeling of reliving the exact same moment again, even knowing rationally that it's impossible? It's not just recognizing the place, the conversation, or the scene. It's something deeper. A shiver that runs down your neck. A strange silence inside your head. A sudden feeling of familiarity that arrives before any logical thought. For a few seconds, it seems like time slows down, as if your brain is absolutely certain of something your mind can't yet explain. Have you ever experienced this? The most intriguing thing about déjà vu isn't the idea of, this has already happened. What really draws attention is the emotional impact that comes with it. It's not a cold, calculated, or rational thought. It's a feeling. An instantaneous recognition that doesn't ask logic for permission. You feel it before you understand it. Or maybe you don't even understand it. You just feel it. And that's precisely what makes this experience so strange, so striking, and for many people, even uncomfortable. During déjà vu, there is no conscious analysis of the type, where has this happened before? Or when have I experienced this? These questions only appear afterward, when the moment has already passed. At that exact instant, what dominates is an intense emotion, almost impossible to translate into words. A mixture of familiarity, strangeness, and certainty. As if the brain were saying, this is known, while reason lags behind trying to catch up with what has just happened. Perhaps that's why so many people describe déjà vu as something almost mystical, profound, or even disturbing. Not because it necessarily has a hidden meaning, but because it completely escapes immediate logic. The human mind likes explanations, order, clear causes. But déjà vu doesn't present itself that way. It invades. It arises from nowhere. And it disappears as quickly as it arrived, leaving only the memory of the sensation. And the most curious thing is that this sensation always seems to carry an emotional charge. Some people report a slight fear, others a strange tranquility, still others a feeling that something important is about to happen. The content of the scene doesn't always matter. Sometimes it's something banal, everyday, without any apparent relevance. Even so, the emotional impact is there. Strong. Real. Unquestionable. What you are about to discover may surprise you. If déjà vu were merely a logical error, a simple memory lapse, it shouldn't provoke this kind of internal reaction. It shouldn't cause chills, discomfort, or that strange silence that seems to shut down the world for a few seconds. And it's precisely this contradiction that makes the phenomenon so fascinating. The brain reacts as if something very significant were happening, even when reason finds no concrete explanation. Perhaps you've already tried to explain this to someone and realized how difficult it is to put into words. I just felt it, is what many people say. And that phrase says more than it seems. Because it reveals something important about how the brain works. Not everything begins with a thought. Not everything goes through logic first. In many cases, emotion arrives first, long before, and only then does the mind try to catch up with the meaning. While you're watching this video, you might be recalling a personal experience of déjà vu. Perhaps you're trying to understand why something so fleeting can leave such a lasting impression. Stay with me until the end, because what lies behind this sensation reveals much more about the workings of the human brain than it first appears. As we move forward, the question that lingers is simple, yet powerful. If déjà vu doesn't begin as a logical thought, then where exactly does this strong emotion that arises out of nowhere come from? This is where the journey begins to get even more interesting. And perhaps that's exactly why this topic resonates so much. Because, at some point in life, almost everyone has felt something similar, even without being able to explain it. If, while you're listening to this, a memory comes to mind, a specific situation where déjà vu appeared out of nowhere, it's worth pausing for a second and acknowledging that experience. If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below about what has touched you most so far or what your own experience with this strange sensation has been like. Sometimes, putting it into words helps organize what the brain felt even before understanding it. If this video is sparking reflection, if at any point you thought, this has happened to me before, consider leaving a like. It's not just a simple gesture. It's a way of showing the algorithm that this type of content matters, that these conversations about how the human brain works deserve to reach more people who also live through these experiences in silence, without knowing exactly what's happening inside their own minds. If you enjoy exploring these mysteries of the brain, memory, emotions, and sensations that seem to follow no apparent logic, subscribing to the channel is a way to continue this journey with me. Here, the idea is precisely to create a space where scientific curiosity and human experience meet, without easy answers, but with increasingly profound questions. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with this type of content. Every comment, every like, every subscription helps keep this exchange alive, this sense of community among people who enjoy understanding what goes on behind the strangest sensations of the human mind. Now that you've realized that déjà vu doesn't begin as a thought, but as a sudden emotion, the next question arises almost naturally. What exactly happens in the brain for this feeling of recognition to appear before logic? It's from here that the story starts to get even more intriguing. There's a very common misconception when we try to understand déjà vu. It's almost automatic. Most people believe it's a thought, a logical glitch, a memory error, as if the brain simply got confused and mixed up similar files. And it makes sense to think that way because we've been trained to believe that everything that happens in the mind begins with reasoning. First we think, then we feel. But déjà vu completely breaks this order. It doesn't ask permission from logic. It doesn't explain anything. It simply happens. If it were something purely rational, you could put it into words. You could say when it happened before, in what context, who you were with, what stage of life you were in. But that's not what happens. In the moment of déjà vu, you're not thinking. You're feeling. The sensation comes ready-made, whole, complete. And only later, when it has already passed, does the mind kick in trying to make sense of it all. It's as if the brain makes a decision before consulting reason. This changes everything. Because it reveals something profound about how our internal experiences work. Logic isn't the starting point. It's a subsequent attempt at translation. Déjà vu is born in a much more primitive, quieter, faster territory. A territory where emotions, patterns, and sensations organize themselves even before any conscious thought arises. That's why it seems so real, so impactful, so difficult to ignore. When déjà vu happens, there's no clear internal dialogue. There's no voice rationally saying, "This has already happened." What exists is an emotional certainty. A conviction without words. And that's disconcerting because we're used to trusting emotion as a consequence, not as an origin. But behind the scenes of the mind, the path is usually the opposite. Emotion arises, logic chases after it and doesn't always manage to catch up. Perhaps that's why so many people are bothered by this experience. The brain creates a feeling of truth, but doesn't provide the evidence. It states something but doesn't explain it. And when the mind tries to understand, it's already too late. The moment has passed. The impact remains. This disconnect between feeling and explaining creates a strange void, almost as if there were a hidden truth there, something that escaped consciousness for a few seconds. And it's at this point that many people get lost, trying to force a logical explanation for something that wasn't born from logic. Déjà vu isn't a poorly formulated thought. It's a complete sensation that doesn't need words to exist. Logic comes in later, almost like a lawyer trying to justify a decision that's already been made. But there aren't always enough arguments. And that's frustrating. This phenomenon exposes an important transformation in how we perceive the human mind. Not everything we feel passes through the rational filter. Many decisions, perceptions, and reactions happen even before we are aware of them. Déjà vu is just one visible example of something that occurs all the time, silently guiding choices, affecting our mindset, and influencing how we interpret reality. When you experience déjà vu, the brain isn't analyzing facts. It's recognizing patterns. But not logical patterns, rather emotional patterns. Similar sensations, similar contexts, recurring internal states. This happens too quickly to become thought. And that's why, when we try to explain it, everything seems to escape. There's no clear line to follow. Only remnants of the sensation. This is one of those moments when we realize that the mind doesn't function like a machine organized in well-defined steps. It works more like a living, dynamic network, where emotion and perception mix before reason enters the scene. Déjà vu lays bare this functioning. It shows that what we feel can have impact, meaning, and power, even without passing through conscious logic. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because understanding why logic comes later requires looking at how the brain prioritizes emotion, familiarity, and survival before rational analysis. It is at this point that the revelations begin to make even more sense, and the experience of déjà vu ceases to seem merely strange and becomes a powerful window into the hidden workings of the human mind. And before we move on, if all of this resonated with you in any way, leave a comment below. That makes sense to me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because, to truly understand déjà vu, it's necessary to accept an idea that contradicts everything we've been taught about thought, logic, and control. The idea that the brain doesn't wait for reason to act. It senses first. And it senses quickly. Much faster than we can consciously perceive. Before any thought is formulated, before the mind constructs internal sentences or seeks explanations, something has already happened behind the scenes. The human brain has been shaped over millions of years to react before reflecting. Emotions are not a secondary detail of the mind, they are a priority system. They function as biological shortcuts for quick decisions. Feeling comes before analyzing because, in terms of survival, waiting for logic could be costly. This mechanism remains active today, even in situations that do not involve real danger. And déjà vu is a clear reflection of this dynamic. When a feeling of familiarity arises suddenly, it doesn't first pass through conscious thought. It emerges from deep areas of the brain responsible for recognizing patterns, contexts, and emotional states. These regions operate at maximum speed, beyond the immediate reach of consciousness. The rational mind, the one that organizes ideas, compares facts, and seeks coherence, comes into play later, almost like a narrator trying to explain something that has already happened without asking permission. This difference in speed creates a curious effect. The emotion arrives fully formed, with intensity, while reason arrives late and confused. The brain has already decided that it is familiar even before you think about it. That's why déjà vu doesn't present itself as a question, but as a silent affirmation. It doesn't seem like something you're evaluating. It seems like something you already know even without knowing why. This is one of the hidden truths about how the mind works. Sensation doesn't need logic to be convincing. It carries its own internal authority. And when that sensation arises, reason tries to catch up, attempting to construct a narrative that makes sense. But often there isn't enough material to build that story. The result is that strange emptiness, that hard-to-explain impact that lingers after déjà vu. This inversion between emotion and thought completely changes how we understand our internal experiences. We are not as rational as we like to believe. Many decisions, perceptions, and reactions begin on an emotional, invisible, silent level. Logic comes in later, adjusting, justifying, organizing. Déjà vu simply exposes this process abruptly, almost didactically. When you experience déjà vu, the brain isn't reflecting on the past. It's reacting to a specific combination of stimuli that trigger a feeling of recognition. This could be a tone of voice, a facial expression, similar lighting, or an emotional state similar to something experienced before. These elements quickly come together and trigger an automatic emotional response. The conscious mind only perceives the final result, without having access to the behind-the-scenes workings of this process. That's where experience gains strength. Because the brain doesn't communicate the process, only the verdict. And the verdict comes loaded with emotional impact. This feeling of certainty without explanation stirs the mind, provokes questions, and often generates exaggerated interpretations. The human mind doesn't like gaps. When logic is lacking, it tries to fill it with meaning. And that meaning doesn't always correspond to reality. This mechanism is not a mistake. It's part of how the brain constructs its perception of the world. Emotions are powerful filters. They help to quickly make sense of experiences, even when that sense isn't entirely accurate. Déjà vu arises when this emotional recognition system kicks in without reason being able to keep up at the same pace. The sensation happens. The analysis comes later. And sometimes it never gets anywhere. This mismatch creates an interesting internal journey. First comes the impact, then the attempt to understand. And, in the midst of all this, arises that strange feeling that something profound has happened, even if we don't know exactly what. This is one of the most important revelations about déjà vu. It is not a poorly formulated thought, but a legitimate emotion that was born before reason had time to act. Understanding this changes how we perceive not only déjà vu, but the very workings of the human mind. It shows that much of our conscious experience is constructed after internal decisions have already been made. It shows that logic is often a narrative created to explain something that began elsewhere. And this has a huge impact on how we deal with feelings, intuitions, and internal certainties. When emotion precedes reason, it shapes the perception of the moment. Déjà vu doesn't need to be logical to be convincing. It imposes itself as a real experience because, for the brain, it is real in that instant. Reason may disagree later, but the impact has already happened. And it is precisely this conflict that makes the phenomenon so intriguing and so striking. As we delve deeper into this reflection, it becomes increasingly clear that déjà vu is not merely a curious detail of the mind. It is a visible sign of something larger happening behind the scenes, a window into understanding how emotions, recognition, and decisions intertwine even before any conscious thought arises. This is the point at which the experience ceases to be merely strange and begins to reveal something essential about how we perceive reality. If all of this sparked any identification or reflection in you, leave a comment below. I'm on this journey too. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. Because there's a fundamental detail that almost no one notices when trying to explain déjà vu. The brain doesn't start by recognizing what's happening outside, it starts by recognizing what's happening inside. Before identifying a scene, a place, or a conversation, it identifies a feeling. It's as if the external world is merely the final trigger for something that was already internally prepared. The familiarity that arises in déjà vu is not visual, nor logical, nor narrative. It is emotional. The brain doesn't ask if it has happened before at some specific point in your life. It doesn't search for dates, faces, or clear memories. It simply affirms, silently and directly, this is familiar. And this affirmation is not accompanied by explanations, only by an intense feeling of recognition. This happens because the human brain is extremely efficient at identifying emotional patterns. Throughout life, you experience thousands of different situations, but many of them share similar internal states. The feeling of expectation, of mild tension, of comfort, of strangeness, of curiosity, of anticipation. These states repeat themselves, even when the external scenario changes completely. The brain learns to recognize these emotional patterns as something familiar, even if the context is new. When a specific set of stimuli triggers an emotional state that has been experienced before, the brain reacts automatically. It doesn't compare scenes, it compares sensations. It's as if it were saying, I know this even if you've never been exactly here. And this response happens too quickly to become conscious thought. The result is that strange feeling that something is repeating itself, even when reason knows it isn't. This is one of the most fascinating behind-the-scenes aspects of déjà vu. It doesn't depend on a clearly stored, actual memory. It depends on a combination of internal sensations that the brain has already experienced at some point in its journey. Light, sound, body posture, tone of voice, emotional state, and even the level of attention align in a specific way. When this alignment happens, the brain triggers the familiarity signal. And this signal doesn't come as a question. It comes as a certainty. The brain doesn't ask, has this happened before? It affirms, this is familiar. This difference changes everything. Because a question opens the door to doubt. An affirmation creates impact. And it's this impact that makes déjà vu seem so real, so intense, and often so disturbing. The conscious mind tries to keep up, but it's too late. It starts searching for a concrete memory to justify that feeling. An old dream, a similar conversation, a movie, a place visited. But most of the time it finds nothing. Because there's no specific memory to find. What exists is only a recognized emotional pattern outside of its original context. It's a familiarity without a history. This process reveals a hidden truth about how we perceive reality. We don't experience the world simply as it is, but as it resonates emotionally within us. The brain filters experiences based on already known sensations. And this influences decisions, reactions, and interpretations in a much deeper way than we imagine. Déjà vu is just one moment when this mechanism becomes visible. When this emotional familiarity arises without warning, it breaks the sense of linearity in time. For a few seconds, it seems that past and present merge. Not because you remembered something, but because you felt something you felt before. This confusion between sensation and memory creates the illusion of repetition. And because the emotion is real, the impact is also real. This phenomenon doesn't indicate failure, error, or mental confusion. It shows how the brain prioritizes efficiency. Recognizing familiar sensations is faster than analyzing entire context. It's a shortcut. A powerful shortcut, but one that, in certain situations, generates strange experiences. Déjà vu is the price of this emotional efficiency. And the more you understand this, the more you realize that déjà vu is not an isolated event. It's part of a larger system that shapes how we interpret the world. Emotional familiarity influences trust, discomfort, attraction, rejection, and even important choices. Many decisions begin with a simple, this feels right, or this feels wrong, long before any logical argument arises. This perception changes the mindset with which we look at our internal experiences. It shows that emotion is not a complement to reason, but a foundation. The brain constructs meaning from what it feels first. And when this construction happens outside the conscious field, the rational mind tries to understand it later, not always successfully. Déjà vu, then, ceases to be merely a curious mystery and becomes a sign. A sign of how the mind works behind the scenes, connecting old sensations to new moments. A reminder that familiarity doesn't always come from memory, but from emotion. And when that emotion arises without context, the impact is inevitable. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. Because when we understand the role of emotional familiarity, we begin to realize that the discomfort of déjà vu doesn't just come from the sensation itself, but from the internal conflict it creates. A conflict between what the brain affirms and what reason cannot confirm. That's where the phenomenon gains an even more intense and intriguing layer. If all of this resonated with you in any way, leave a comment below. That makes sense to me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because it is precisely here that déjà vu ceases to be merely curious and becomes unsettling. The strangeness that accompanies this experience is not a secondary detail. It is the heart of the phenomenon. That feeling of discomfort, the unexpected shiver, the inner silence that seems to shut down the world for a few seconds do not arise by chance. They are born from a very specific conflict that takes place behind the scenes of the mind. The emotion is real. It arrives strong, clear, convincing. The body reacts as if something important has been recognized. The brain fires signals of familiarity, as if it were absolutely certain that this is part of its history. But, at the same time, memory reveals nothing. There are no images of the past, no concrete memories, no clear records to support this feeling. It's as if two parts of the mind are telling different stories at the same time. This disconnect has an immediate impact. Emotion asserts something with conviction, while reason searches for evidence that doesn't exist. The brain seems to say trust, but the conscious mind responds with doubt. It is precisely in this space between emotional certainty and absence of memory that strangeness is born. It's not intense fear nor panic. It's something more subtle. A slight discomfort, an internal suspense, a feeling that something is out of place. This type of conflict is rare in everyday life. Normally, when we feel something, we manage to justify it in some way. Even if the explanation comes later, it does come. In déjà vu, it doesn't. The emotion appears complete, but the story doesn't form. And the human mind doesn't deal well with gaps. When an explanation is lacking, unease arises. The inner silence is not emptiness, it's tension. It's as if the brain is absolutely certain of something, but the mind has no evidence to support that certainty. And this breaks the feeling of control. After all, we're used to believing we understand what we feel, even if we can't always explain everything in detail. In déjà vu, this illusion of control disappears for a few seconds. You feel something strong without knowing why. And this messes with anyone's mindset. The chills that many people report don't come from the sensation of repetition itself. They come from the clash between two systems that are out of sync. Emotion and memory collide. Emotion says, "This is familiar." Memory says, "I have no record of this." And the body reacts to this inconsistency. The discomfort is the physical response to an unresolved internal conflict. This phenomenon also explains why déjà vu is often so silent. It's not a moment of racing thoughts. On the contrary, many people report an internal pause as if the mind is suspended for an instant. This happens because reason is trying to understand something that hasn't been constructed in the rational realm. There aren't enough words. There isn't enough logic. The silence is a reflection of this frustrated attempt at explanation. This sense of estrangement has a profound impact on how we interpret experience. When something emotionally intense happens without apparent cause, the mind tends to seek deeper meanings. There's a feeling that it holds a hidden truth, a concealed message, something beyond what is visible. Not because it's necessarily real, but because the brain hates inconsistencies. It wants to close the story even if it needs to invent parts of it. It is at this point that déjà vu takes on an almost mysterious air. Not because of what it is, but because of what it doesn't deliver. It offers emotion without context, certainty without memory, impact without explanation. And this combination is powerful. It captures attention, generates reflection, and in some people even provokes a slight fear. Not a concrete fear, but that subtle discomfort of realizing that not everything within the mind is transparent or predictable. This moment reveals something important about the human journey. Much of our sense of security comes from the ability to understand what we feel. When this ability fails, even for a few seconds, something shifts internally. Déjà vu exposes this fragility. It shows that there are internal decisions being made without conscious awareness. And this, for many, is disconcerting. The brain sees no problem with this. For it, the emotion fulfilled its role. The signal was set. Recognition occurred. It's the conscious mind that tries to put the pieces together afterward. And when it can't, the result is this strange, suspended state, almost out of time. A moment when you feel a lot, but understand little. This conflict between emotion and memory is not an isolated flaw. It's part of a larger system that prioritizes speed and efficiency. The problem is that when this system kicks in without clear support from memory, the result deviates from the norm. Déjà vu is one of those moments when the brain's normal functioning becomes visible, almost raw, without filters. And this has a greater psychological impact than it seems. The feeling passes quickly, but the mark remains. Not because something extraordinary happened, but because the mind was exposed to an experience without a narrative. An internal event that doesn't easily fit into a beginning, middle, and end. And anything that deviates from this format generates strangeness. It generates reflection. It generates that silent question that keeps echoing afterward, what was that? Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because, when we understand why this feeling of strangeness arises, we begin to realize that déjà vu is not just an isolated sensation, but a direct consequence of how the brain constructs meaning. And it is precisely at this point that the phenomenon begins to reveal something even more unsettling about our relationship with memory, truth, and the perception of reality. If this part made sense to you, leave a comment below. That makes sense to me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because it is precisely here that déjà vu begins to gain a weight that it, by itself, did not have at the beginning. After the emotion occurs, after the strangeness arises and the mind realizes that there is no real memory to support that sensation, something almost automatic kicks in, the search for meaning. The brain is not content with emptiness. It does not readily accept intense experiences without explanation. So it begins to construct a narrative, even if that narrative has no concrete basis. It is at this moment that thoughts like, this is a sign, this is important, this means something appear. Not because there is, in fact, a hidden message at that instant, but because the human mind has been shaped to find meaning in things. Especially when something has an emotional impact. The stronger the emotion, the greater the need for explanation. Déjà vu activates exactly this mechanism. The emotion comes first, raw, without explanation. Soon after, the mind steps in, trying to organize it into a comprehensible narrative. It's as if the brain says, something relevant happened, and consciousness responds, then I need to find out what it was. But in this case, there's no extraordinary external event. What happened was an internal event. An emotional reaction triggered by patterns that align behind the scenes. But this isn't obvious to the person experiencing it. This process creates the illusion of depth. The sensation seems too great to be random. It seems too intense not to carry some kind of revelation. And that's when the brain begins to fill in the gaps with interpretations. It associates the moment with recent decisions, personal doubts, life paths, important choices. Suddenly, déjà vu ceases to be just a strange sensation and begins to seem like a landmark, a warning, almost an invisible turning point. But the crucial detail is this: the meaning wasn't there at the moment of the experience. It was constructed afterward. The emotion happened without a script. The narrative came as a response to the discomfort of not understanding. The mind creates meaning not because it exists, but because it needs it to restore the feeling of control. Giving meaning is a way to calm the internal conflict that déjà vu generates. This mechanism doesn't only happen with déjà vu. It's part of how we deal with many human experiences. Unexpected situations, significant encounters, coincidences, strong sensations. In all these cases, the brain tends to look back and piece together a story that explains the impact. Déjà vu simply makes this process more evident because the experience begins without any clear rational basis. The illusion of profound meaning arises precisely from this inversion. First comes the emotion. Then comes the explanation. However, since the explanation finds no support in memory, it ends up relying on subjective interpretations. The mind projects importance where there was only emotional intensity. This does not make the experience false, but it shows that the weight attributed to it is a later construction. This point is fundamental to understanding why so many people are impressed by déjà vu. It's not just the phenomenon itself, but what it awakens afterward. It opens up space for reflections on destiny, choices, time, reality. It seems to interrupt the linearity of life for a few seconds. And when something breaks the normal flow of experience, the mind tends to elevate it to a special level. Behind the scenes, the brain is constantly working to create coherence. It connects events, emotions, and decisions to form a continuous narrative of who we are and where we are going. Déjà vu appears as an outlier in this narrative, something that doesn't quite fit. To correct this, the mind tries to force it into a larger story. Hence the feeling that, this means something. This construction of meaning also has a direct impact on mindset. More reflective people tend to delve into these interpretations. More anxious people may feel greater discomfort, precisely because the mind tries to solve something that doesn't have a clear solution. In both cases, the brain is doing what it does best, seeking meaning even when it's not necessary. The hidden truth here is simple and uncomfortable at the same time. Not every intense experience carries a message. Not every deep emotion points to a special event. Some sensations are simply the result of internal systems working too fast for consciousness to keep up with. Déjà vu is an example of this. The meaning we give it speaks more about our need for explanation than about the phenomenon itself. This doesn't diminish the impact of the experience. On the contrary, understanding that meaning is constructed afterward broadens our understanding of how the human mind creates reality. It shows that much of what we consider important stems from how we interpret sensations, not necessarily from what actually happened. The brain transforms emotion into narrative to maintain the coherence of its own story. This process is part of the human journey. We are constantly reinterpreting the past in light of the present, adjusting memories, giving new meaning to events, creating connections that help us move forward. Déjà vu simply condenses this mechanism into a few intense seconds. It shows, in an almost didactic way, how the mind constructs meaning after the impact. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because, when we understand that meaning comes after emotion, we begin to realize that déjà vu isn't just about memory or recognition, but about how the brain shapes our perception of reality and influences our decisions without us even realizing it. It's at this point that the phenomenon begins to touch on something even bigger. If this thought resonated with you, leave a comment below. I'm on this journey too. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because understanding why déjà vu is so strongly imprinted on memory reveals something essential about how the brain decides what is worth remembering. It's not the duration of the event that defines its importance. It's not the logical clarity. It's the emotional charge. The human brain doesn't function like a camera that records everything neutrally. It functions like an editor. It selects, cuts, enlarges, and highlights what had enough emotional impact to deserve a place in memory. Emotional events are treated as a priority. They activate internal systems linked to survival, attention, and learning. When something evokes emotion, the brain understands that it may be relevant in the future. And that's why it registers it more strongly. Purely logical, predictable, and neutral events, on the other hand, go almost unnoticed. They happen but they don't leave deep marks. Déjà vu, even lasting only a few seconds, falls into the category of what has an emotional impact. And that changes everything. During déjà vu, the brain enters a subtle state of alert. Something deviates from the norm. Something doesn't fit. This break in expectation creates internal tension that the brain interprets as significant. It doesn't matter if the experience lacks a clear explanation. The simple fact of generating strangeness and emotion is enough to activate more intense memory mechanisms. The result is a vivid recollection of something that, rationally, almost didn't happen. It's curious to realize that when we try to remember a déjà vu, we can't reconstruct the thought we had at that moment. We don't remember the logic, the analysis, the questions that arose afterward. What remains is the sensation. The shiver, the inner silence, the strangeness. You don't remember what you thought. You remember what you felt. And that says a lot about how memory works. Human memory is not a faithful archive of facts. It is a reconstruction based on emotion. The greater the emotional impact, the greater the chance that that moment will be stored prominently. Déjà vu fits perfectly into this mechanism. It provokes an unexpected, intense, and difficult to classify emotion. This causes the brain to treat it as something worthy of being stored, even if there is no clear story associated with it. This process helps explain why, years later, a person still clearly remembers a specific déjà vu, even without remembering important details of that day. The emotion becomes the core of the memory. Everything else dissolves. The experience remains isolated in memory as something special, out of the ordinary. And the more the person revisits that memory, the more it reinforces the feeling that it was important. Here's an interesting detail. Whenever you recall a déjà vu, you're not just accessing the original memory. You're reconstructing that experience based on the recorded emotion. Each memory reinforces the associated emotional intensity. This creates a cycle. The event was intense. The memory keeps that intensity alive. And the repetition of the memory further solidifies the emotional imprint. This mechanism has a direct impact on how we interpret the phenomenon. The fact that déjà vu is unforgettable makes it seem bigger than it actually was. It gains symbolic weight. It begins to seem like an outlier in one's personal journey. Not because it lasted a long time or changed anything concrete, but because it left an emotional impression too strong to be ignored. This dynamic isn't unique to déjà vu. Major personal transformations, important decisions, and turning points are also often remembered more for how we feel than how we think. The human mind organizes its own history based on emotional peaks. Déjà vu fits into this logic as a high-impact micro-event. Small in time, big in sensation. The brain interprets these experiences as signs of something different. Something that deserves attention. Even if, in practice, there is no direct consequence. The emotional impact creates the illusion of relevance. And this illusion is enough to keep the event alive in memory for a long time. That's how déjà vu becomes unforgettable, even without explanation. This understanding changes how we view our memories. It shows that not everything we remember intensely actually had an objective meaning. Some experiences remain etched in our memory simply because they triggered strong emotions. The brain doesn't judge whether something is logical or useful. It registers what moves us. And déjà vu does. This realization is part of an important transformation in how we understand the mind. Memory is not an organized timeline. It is an emotional map. And in this map, déjà vu occupies a special place precisely because it is strange, unexpected, and intense. It doesn't need meaning to be remembered. It only needs impact. Upon realizing this, we begin to understand that the power of déjà vu lies not in what it reveals about the past, but in what it reveals about the workings of the mind. It shows that emotion is the primary criterion for memory storage. That what we feel shapes the internal narrative much more than what we understand rationally. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. Because when we combine emotion, memory, and interpretation, we begin to realize that déjà vu not only marks the memory but also influences how the mind constructs its own reality over time. And it is at this point that the experience ceases to be merely remembered and begins to silently interfere with how we perceive the world. If all of this made sense to you, leave a comment below. That makes sense to me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. Because after all this, the question that remains is not just about déjà vu itself, but about what it reveals about us. When we connect science and human experience, we begin to realize that déjà vu functions almost like a mirror. It doesn't point to an isolated error in the brain, but to an essential characteristic of the mind. Not everything originates from reason, and that's not a problem. It's part of normal functioning. For a long time, we were taught to value logical thinking as if it were always in control. As if our decisions, perceptions, and certainties arose from conscious, organized, and linear analyses. Déjà vu dismantles this idea in a few seconds. It shows that there are processes happening behind the scenes, long before logic comes into play. Quick, emotional, silent processes that shape how we perceive the world. Science explains this with increasing clarity. The brain is a layered system. Some layers work with conscious thought, language, and reasoning. Others operate at a deeper level, recognizing patterns, assessing relevance, and triggering emotions. Déjà vu happens when these layers don't align perfectly. Emotion arrives forcefully, reason arrives late. And this delay creates strangeness, impact, and reflection. But looking more closely, this is not a flaw. It's a natural consequence of a brain that evolved to react quickly. Emotion has always taken priority because, in many contexts, it needed to come before thought. Sensing danger before understanding the danger was an advantage. Sensing familiarity before analyzing the context could also be. These mechanisms remain active, even in a world very different from the one in which they arose. Déjà vu lays bare this mechanism. It shows that the brain doesn't wait for authorization from the conscious mind to act. It senses, recognizes, and reacts first. Only then does reason attempt to understand what happened. And when it fails, that strange feeling of explanatory emptiness arises. Not because something is wrong, but because logic didn't participate in the beginning of the process. This realization can be uncomfortable at first. After all, we like to believe we understand everything that goes on inside us. But it can also be liberating. Accepting that not everything is rational helps alleviate the constant need for control. Not every feeling needs a complete explanation. Not every intense experience carries a hidden message. Some are simply the result of internal systems functioning exactly as they should. Déjà vu, in this sense, becomes a powerful reminder. A reminder that the human mind is more complex, faster, and more emotional than rational narratives usually admit. It shows that emotion and reason are not opposites, but different stages of the same process. Emotion paves the way. Reason tries to organize things afterward. And sometimes it can't tie up all the loose ends. That's normal. When we look at it from this angle, déjà vu ceases to be something to be feared or overinterpreted. It becomes a window. A small opening that allows us to see how decisions, perceptions, and meanings begin to form even before we are aware of it. It reveals that our experience of reality is constructed from the inside out, beginning with feeling and only then moving on to thinking. This understanding has an impact beyond déjà vu. It touches on how we deal with intuitions, first impressions, and unexpected emotional reactions. How many times have you felt something before you could explain it? How many decisions have been influenced by a "this feels right" or "this doesn't sound right to me," even without clear arguments? Déjà vu is simply a concentrated version of this process, happening intensely and visibly. Perhaps déjà vu isn't a mistake of the mind. Perhaps it's a silent reminder that emotion always precedes reason. A reminder that not everything needs to be immediately understood to be real. A reminder that the human brain works in layers, and that consciousness isn't present in all of them all the time. When this idea takes hold, something changes in how we view these strange experiences. Instead of trying to force them into grand explanations, we begin to see them as signs of the inner workings of the mind. Small revelations about how we construct meaning, memory, and perception along the way. And it is precisely here that reflection continues to unfold, because when we accept that emotion and reason do not walk hand in hand from the beginning, we begin to question to what extent our daily certainties also arise from this same silent, emotional, and invisible process. It is at this point that déjà vu ceases to be merely a curious phenomenon and begins to raise even deeper questions about how we perceive reality. If this idea has been resonating with you, leave a comment below. I'm on this journey too. If you've made it this far, it's because this topic has truly resonated with you. Perhaps some part of it reminded you of a personal experience. Maybe it changed the way you see those strange sensations that arise out of nowhere. If at any point you thought this message was for me, leave that in the comments. Write something simple like, "I'm with you until the end," or "This message was for me." I read, and that helps keep this conversation alive. If this video provided value to you, if it helped you understand a little better how the brain works behind emotions and logic, consider leaving a like. It's a silent way of saying that this exchange was meaningful and that this type of content deserves to continue existing here. And if you enjoy exploring these mysteries of the mind, perception, and human experience in depth and calmly, subscribing to the channel is the most natural way to continue this journey with me. The idea here is precisely that, to provoke reflection, bring clarity, and open up new questions without ready-made answers. There's a video over here that complements this topic and delves even deeper into these strange phenomena of the human brain. Click and continue watching it.